بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد نورك ساري مددك الجاري واجمعني في كل أطواري وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يا نور الحمد لله رب العالمين. Jazakumullah khair, everybody, for taking the time to come. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So apologies for starting a little bit late, but we'll go ahead and dive straight in. So last week we covered the different frameworks for how we think about the purification of the heart. And we talked about these different faculties which exist inside of the human being. There's the outer world, and the outer world has its governments. The outer world has its polities and its structures, and then there's the inner world of the human being. So most of us, we know what exists in the outer world. There's a government, there's a civic body that does certain things, a police force that does certain things or doesn't do anything. There's a grocery store, these types of things, which are structures which exist that we engage with to go about our life. Similarly, inside of the human body, from a spiritual and metaphysical sense, inside of the human consciousness, there is a spiritual world. Imam al-Ghazali, he describes this world at length. It can be found in his book Ajaib al-Qalb, The Marvels of the Heart, which is in the famous Ihya Ulumuddin. And so if we can understand how the inner world works, then that helps us figure out how we go about purifying the heart. So we covered this in a lot of detail. We won't go into too much more of that today, but we're going to focus on today is the comprehensive way that the scholars describe how we go about calming down this inner world and getting it into a state of equilibrium. So we talked about last time this concept of an equilibrium and a balance. And the human being and the Muslim is created to be in a state of equilibrium. We are created as an ummatan wasata, a middle nation. The more that we can become in line with this equilibrium, which is the perfection of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the perfection of his traits, then the better our life will be, and the more pure we will be able to, the more stages of purity that we will be able to attain. So today we're going to cover that in a little bit of detail, and then we're going to get into the first few diseases that the heart has, and start going really in more detail through the text that we are covering for the class. Alhamdulillah. So what we discussed last time is the fastest cure to disciplining the heart, to disciplining the nafs rather, and purifying the heart is hunger, is fasting. And we know this in the month of Ramadan, that when we go through 30 days, 29 days of continuous fasting, and we discipline ourselves and we discipline this faculty of the appetite. So we talked about this faculty of the appetite, the quwwa shahwaniyah, which is the faculty which is in control of our lusts and in control of all sorts of greed and other negative qualities, which have a very base carnal component to them. And so the human being, when they're struggling with this faculty, one of the best things to fast and is to keep it light in terms of what we eat. This has two components. There's the formal fast, which is the fasting of the day, fasting from when Fajr enters until Maghrib comes in. That's very good to do, and the sunnah is to try to do so 3 times a month or 2 times a week, whatever amount someone is able to maintain. The key is consistency in this, and so we should try to strive to at least 3 days a month, especially in these summer months when the days are longer, and then we should try to eventually get to a point where we're doing it once a week, and then if we can do it twice a week, that's even better. It will teach the nafs what discipline is, and it will let the nafs know that, hey, you're not in charge of me, I'm in charge of you. And that's one of the fastest ways to begin purifying the heart. So that's component number 1 of curtailing the appetite via fasting or via hunger. The second one is not when somebody's not fasting, but they are keeping it very light in terms of their food intake, and thus they are able to maintain their carnal appetites and regulate their carnal appetites in a much more effective way. And so in our tradition, it's not recommended, and it's not in alignment with the sunnah, to overeat. Prophet ﷺ, as we mentioned last time as well, he said to eat just enough to keep your back straight, and if you need more, then 1/3 1/3 food, 1/3 water, and 1/3 room for air. So the appetite, it gets expanded. It literally gets fed. The nafs gets stronger the more that we eat and we eat and we eat and we keep giving it what it wants, all sorts of delicacies and treats and desserts and this type of thing. If this is something the nafs gets accustomed to. And we'll talk about how this relates to wealth, because some people, they try to create Jannah on this planet. And if they're given enough wealth, they can try to do that. They can try to make it such that this life is quote unquote like paradise, that there's no difficulty that they have to endure. The human being, we, alhamdulillah, if we live in blessed conditions like many of us do in the West, we don't know what it's like to be rough anymore. We go for a few minutes or a few days. If somebody ever goes camping or something like that, we all of these luxuries, they go away, and immediately we feel constricted. The key is to teach the nafs discipline without us having to get into those constrained circumstances. This is one of the fastest ways to purifying the heart. So anyhow, the high level here is to limit the food intake and to be very, very, very mindful of how much we eat as a means of regulating the nafs and as a means of regulating the heart. And this is comprehensive. So what does that mean? Comprehensive cures that they talk about, they mean that all of the diseases of the heart that we're about to talk about will start to be mitigated and tamed if we do this. So there's specific treatments for each disease, which we're about to get into, inshallah. And then there's a general treatment that says, hey, if you just keep this lifestyle up, if this becomes part of your spiritual routine, then you will start to, it will have a medicinal and healing effect on all of the diseases. Not very similar to, for example, for a disease that we might have physically, a doctor might prescribe a very specific medicine. But in addition to that medicine, we need to have a general lifestyle which goes along, a lifestyle of exercise, a lifestyle of eating properly, and so on and so forth. It works spiritually in a similar way. You can't really tackle the key diseases of the heart if we don't do these general remedies that are meant to provide spiritual cures for the human being. So that's one of them, is limiting the food intake. The second one is limiting the sleep in the sense that striving to pray extra in the early hours of the morning, and striving to seek Allah's forgiveness, and striving to pray the tahajjud prayer. So this is assuming already that we're praying our 5 daily prayers. Of course, what the scholars, when they talk about these types of things, they're assuming that there's already a consistent spiritual structure and a schedule that we have with regards to the fara'id. If we're not doing the fara'id, if we're not doing, praying our 5 daily salawat, then it's a whole different, these techniques won't be applicable really until we start to do those things, because you don't pray extra if you're not doing the basics, right? It's getting getting it wrong. So nawafil don't really count, or don't really matter, you could say, until the fara'id are secure. So, but the second component of this is limiting the sleep. Why? Because when somebody is in a state of deep sleep and slumber, and they just want to keep sleeping and sleeping, and then they're forced to wake up, what happens? That nafs, it doesn't like it. But if the nafs learns that, hey, again, you're in charge and it's not in charge of you, and we are in charge, it's not in charge of us, and so that morning alarm goes off, early in the morning, if Fajr is coming in at 4:30 something, 4:40, and then it goes off even sooner than that, it's not easy for the nafs to do that. Or you stay awake a little bit later to keep, pray Isha, and then pray a little bit after that, a little extra qiyam. It doesn't like that, because it wants to just relax and do all. It doesn't mind watching 2 hours of television or Netflix or something like that, but it doesn't want to wake up and pray early, or it doesn't want to stay late and pray, stay awake late and pray. So this will be one of the fastest ways, again, to regulate the nafs. So we see in the routine of the Prophet ﷺ, what he used to do. He used to keep his food intake light, and then he would also get up. His routine regularly was to pray for at least 1/3 of the night. A good portion of the night, the Prophet ﷺ would be praying. So that we don't have to do that, but we should do at least a little bit. We should strive to at least do 2 rak'ah at night, and we should strive, if we can do more than that, to wake up before Fajr, and to do 2, 4, 8, 6, 8, how much ever we can do. And if we can't do that in these months because Fajr comes in early in the summer months, then we should strive to pray a little extra at night after Salatul Isha, and then make sure that we're still of course keeping and protecting our our Fajr prayer. But this is all very, very, very important for spiritual discipline. We live in a time where there's no discipline anymore. Everybody wants to follow their own hawa, their own desires. Everybody wants to do what they think that it's about. It's about what the desires want. It's about what the nafs wants. All these slogans and logos that promote the self, even the selfie. This idea of taking a picture of yourself. It never used to be a thing until the nafs started to become bigger and bigger and bigger. Literally, translate that word, it means nafsi, that it's about myself. So the more the Muslim in the Islamic tradition, we don't center the self. We center other people, and ultimately we center Allah. The goal is not us. We're trying to get rid of our own negative traits and negative qualities until we really only think about Allah, which is a very, very high spiritual station that somebody can reach. So these exercises spiritually that one does, they help us to regulate the nafs. They help us to regulate the nafs and to purify the heart. So that's the second one. The third one is in controlling the tongue. Controlling the tongue when anger comes, and restraining anger really is the main one. So we know that there's two big chief appetites or chief faculties that the human being has. There's appetite and there's anger. We talked about appetite, so fasting and limiting the food intake, as well as cutting back on the sleep and trying to pray more in the early morning hours, will have a healing effect on those appetites. And you'll just see it. It'll just work. For example, if somebody has a very hard time controlling their lust, and they wake up that morning for Salatul Tahajjud, they'll find that day much easier for them to lower their gaze or control their lust. Just the way that spiritually, the nur that comes in, the light that comes in at that time will help them in these activities. So if they recite Quran regularly, it will have a profound effect. Of course, if they're fasting, as we mentioned, it should inshallah have a profound effect. The second one then is to control the tongue. Why? Because the tongue is also something which anytime somebody says something to us, our initial reaction is to lash out many times as a human being. We say what we want to say instead of restraining ourselves. So if we can get accustomed to keeping the tongue under the regulation of our intellect and not under the regulation of the nafs. So you can either be under the regulation of your lower soul, or you can elevate to higher levels, and the intellect, which is a spiritual phenomenon, can start to govern you and me. If that happens, now anytime we want to say something to somebody, we're going to think twice. Anytime we want to lose our cool, we're going to think twice. Anytime we want to say a vulgar language or speak poorly about somebody, we're going to try to regulate. So it's controlling the tongue has a very, very profound component very, very profound impact rather on this path to purifying the heart. So these are the high level cures that are recommended. There is a lot more that we'll get into towards the end, inshallah, but for today, those are the main ones that we want to cover. And again, what they're doing is, remember, there's just medicine. Like you don't see, like when you take, for example, I don't know if anyone else is struggling with allergies these days, but may Allah give assistance if you are. I've been struggling with allergies recently, and so if you take medicine for the allergies, it'll mitigate it to a certain degree. And then if you take more medicines, you could take like the allergy, the antihistamine, and then you could take like the Flonase spray, and then you could use eye drops to help. And so there's different things you can do to help with different types of symptoms, right? And then maybe all of them together, you and I don't know what effect that's having on the body. We don't know what effect it's having inside of us, what chemical reactions are taking place to then go and do whatever work needs to be done in order to regulate the intensity of the sneezing and the red eyes and all the different, the sore throat, everything that comes if somebody has severe allergies. But something's happening, right? You're taking it and something's happening. Spiritually, when it comes to these things, it's way stronger than any medicine or any treatment we're doing for our physical diseases or our physical struggles. Something is definitely happening. We don't always know, we don't understand, and nor are we required to understand. The scholars of the spiritual sciences, like Imam Ghazali, they'll get into detail saying this is what's going on, this is what's going on, this is what's going on. The Quran expounds in detail if somebody reads it with tafakkur and reflection, and gives us clues as to what's going on. But it should be sufficient that Allah Ta'ala, He says, that we sent this Quran as a shifa for the mu'mineen, as a healing and as a rahmah for the believers. And so in it is all the healing and mercy that we need. And of course, that this includes the application of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we don't know what's going to happen, but when we're struggling with these things, we should take on these practices to help us cure what's going on inside, so we don't live a life of perpetual disease where we never end up getting better with the things that we're struggling with. Okay, so the first disease then that is at play that starts in the book. So the book that we're following is called Purification of the Heart. It's been translated by and expanded commentary by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Somebody can get it on YouTube or not YouTube, rather on Amazon or online somewhere. And there are I would highly recommend going through the process. I actually think that it's Creative Commons license, so I think it's actually published online as well, and you can download it as a free PDF. So that's what we're going through. So the first disease the Sheikh starts with the disease of bukhl, which is miserliness, translates to miserliness. So he's not going in order of importance in this case. He's going just in alphabetical order in Arabic. So this is the first one that starts, and then he ends with whichever one is going to come at the end. But this doesn't mean that miserliness is like the most significant disease. Other scholars, they will go in order sometimes of the most significant disease or whatever. They have different classifications. So Imam Ghazali sometimes talks about the root diseases or different stations, different diseases that need to be cured before you can move on to the next one. But that's not what we're doing here, but we'll try to link them, inshallah. Great. So it's a didactic poem and it's been translated in English. I'm going to try every now and then to read parts of the poem that are relevant. And then get into the commentary. So he says so the refusal to give what is obliged, to give away what is obliged according to the sacred law, or to virtuous merit is the essence of miserliness, of being a miser, which is mentioned among the diseases of the heart. As for the obligations of the Sharia, they are things such as zakat, supporting one's dependents, rights that are due to others, and relieving those in need. And examples of virtuous merit, so there's what's required, and then he gets into examples of virtuous merit, include not nitpicking over trivialities. Avoiding this is even more important with respect to a neighbor, a relative, or somebody who is notable, or when hosting guests, or concerning something in which such behavior is inappropriate, such as purchasing one's kafan or a sacrificial animal for Eid or for other purposes, or purchasing something that you intend to donate to the needy. Thus, one who makes matters difficult for one whose rights can do so, such as a neighbor, has indeed torn away the veils of dignity. This is as the majestic and guiding sages have stated. This is comparable to one who fulfills their obligations without good cheer, or who spends from the least of which they possess. Its root is love of this world for its own sake, or so that the nafs can acquire some of its fleeting pleasures. So this is the part of it, and then he gets into the second part of the treatment. So we'll just kind of cover this in a little bit of detail. So the first component of this, what is he saying? He's saying that if somebody literally, miserliness is described as withholding. Okay, so somebody has wealth, they're required in certain instances to give the wealth, or it would be virtuous to give the wealth, and they just withhold. They're just like, no, I'm not going to give it. I'm just there. It's the height of, we could translate this as stinginess as well. Somebody who's extremely stingy with their, not just their wealth necessarily, but with their wealth, their time, their home, their space, even their manners. And he expands upon this in a little bit more detail. But at the fundamental level, this is somebody could be miserly and be being cheap, and they're not paying their zakat. This is a big problem. If somebody doesn't pay their zakat, that's very, very, very dangerous in our religion, because zakat is literally the purification of the wealth. Our wealth, as we go throughout the year, accumulates certain impurities, and zakat is literally us getting rid of all those impurities. So to keep back this something that's impure and won't purify our wealth, and we're basically saying, hey, I could get rid of all the impurities in my wealth by giving away 2.5% of my standing wealth, right, which is the amount that one has to give in zakat. Or I could, and so the rest of my wealth, the 97.5%, becomes clean. or I keep what's from the zakat and I don't give it back, I don't give it away, and everything becomes impure. This is what's called limiting barakah in your wealth and making it impure. So zakat, he says, the first way miserliness will manifest, somebody's like, I don't want to pay zakat. And if they have to, they're like, fine, I'll do it. It's super begrudgingly. They calculate the zakat, they're like, I guess I have to pay it. And they just keep, they drag it on, maybe till the final moment. And then even then some, and then they finally do it. So this is how miserliness is exemplified. This is one way. Another way is the family needs something for our family members, because we have responsibility, right? If we are earning income, especially for men, this is a fard that one is required to provide for their family. And for women, in certain instances, for the most accounts, it's something optional for them to do. But if they are in that position of responsibility over their family, and they don't have father or husband or somebody else to assist, then if either person is saying, hey, I'm not going to give, my child needs something, I'm not going to pay for it, my spouse needs something, I don't want to do it. And it's just like this, even though the money exists in the bank, somebody has $20,000 in their bank account, but they just don't want to spend it on anyone else. They just want to see that number. They just want to see it there. They just want to see it growing and growing, even though it's not actually growing because of inflation, but they just want to see it, that number remaining in a certain way. Same thing then goes with this quality, not spending on other people when we can. So we have the option to help. And this doesn't mean like spending an insane amount on people. This just means a little options here and there, right? You go out with a friend for coffee and you pay for their coffee. Let me just try to do that. The Muslims traditionally, very generous people, right? Like Muslims, you see a Muslim at a restaurant, two men, or competing to pay for dinner, and who's paying for dinner, and usually it's very sincere, especially people who grew up in Islamic cultures, and they're like, no, I gotta pay, it's my treat, right? And this doesn't mean, again, if it's like $1,000 bill and somebody cannot afford that, as somebody goes above their means to do something like that. That's not what we're talking about. But like every now and then, making sure to go out of our way to pay for other people and to spend on other people, this is very, very virtuous for us to do. We are not a group of people who literally, see somebody and then we send everybody a Venmo request for every little dollar and cent that we spent on them. Again, unless we're like in dire need and circumstances, generosity is far more preferred. That we are people as Muslims who should be going out of our way to spend on other people, and not embracing a culture of, it's my portion and your portion, right? It's like no. Again, that comes back to a very self-centered worldview, and so alhamdulillah that many times in the Muslim world, this in Islamic families, it's still the case where folks will have guests over and whatnot, and like going to go out of their way to serve the guests, even if the guest is coming over for like 30 minutes, stopping by on their drive somewhere. People will go out of their way to make tea or make chai or serve snacks or to serve juice or something, just a little bit, whatever they can manage, and that's from their generosity. And to withhold something is from our miserliness, right? This could even be like a child does this, right? When they're like, no, they have like 3 cookies, and they're like, no, it's all my cookies. I'm not going to give the cookies away. The child doesn't have money to spend, but they have the cookies or the candy or whatever else, hopefully maybe healthy snacks instead of those things. But for them to withhold it, that's something childish. But as adults, we're supposed to grow up. We're not supposed to be children, right? You try to take something away from a child, they get very upset. As adults, we're not supposed to let that same emotion come. And then another way that this trait comes out is demanding money that's owed to you. Totally fine, but to demand it in an arrogant way, right? So, you owe me money, when are you going to pay it back to me? Like that type of way, right? No, when somebody goes and we've lent somebody money and then they owe us, the debt becomes due, we ask with gentleness and with kindness. This is the way of the Muslims. So miserliness goes back to this trait of being very, very just cheap with our money and being very stingy. And then again, it can manifest at various levels. So not paying zakat, all the way down to the way we spend on other people and so on. Islamically, what we're supposed to strive towards is to be magnanimous and generous. So this is what the text mentions, that Islamic ethics for people, if we have wealth, to be generous with the wealth, to be magnanimous in our understanding, right? There's a hadith of a man who, he didn't have that many good deeds. He barely had any good deeds. The one thing that he would do is he would lend people, he would lend people money, and then when he had a debt collector, and this other man would go out to collect the debts for him, And he said, if somebody like can't pay their debt back, just don't make it difficult for them. And if they really can't pay it back, just let it go. Just forgive it. Just tell them it's not owed. And so then he met Allah, and again, he didn't have really any good deeds except this. And so what Allah said is, he was generous then, and I am the most generous. So he pardoned this man completely, and he forgave him, even though he didn't have many other good deeds. So Allah loves generosity. Al-Kareem is one of the names of Allah. The Kareem, the Al-Kareem, the generous. So Allah likes generosity, and He doesn't like stinginess. He doesn't like stinginess, right? As Allah Ta'ala, He mentions treasures of Allah. Allah has these treasures in bounty. He has the keys to the treasures of the heavens and the earth and the unseen. But if the human being were to have them, they would keep it all for themselves. So just one human being, no, it might run out. It might run out. But Allah doesn't. There's no concept of the mercy or the gifts or the amazing gifts that Allah is going to give. They are not going to run out. And so how do we relate this to the name of Allah Al-Kareem? We should remember that if we're generous, He will be generous with us, and He'll give us more, inshallah. That there's nothing to lose, because it's all created. This is monopoly money in the eyes of God. It's all fake, right? Artificial. It's all created. There's no difference between $1 and $1 million and $1 billion. It's all just created, and Allah can create as He will. That He says regularly in the Quran, يَرْزُقْهُ مَن يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. He provides for whom He will without any reckoning, right? So this is the way to understand this trait. So one component of it is with wealth. This is how it manifests, and we talked about some of the ways in which it can practically show up in our lives. Another way that it comes is if we're just like an undignified, nitpicky person who's constantly getting bothered by other people. So what happens is we're not generous with our personality. We're not generous in terms of the way in which we embrace people. This is also miserliness that is coming out. What is an example of this? So he mentions in the text that if somebody's over at a home and they spill something on the carpet, that we're just like, oh my God, how could you do that? Like, it's a new carpet, don't you know this costs so much money? Or if we don't do that, we think all that and we make them feel really bad about it. The Muslim, the trait that we're supposed to have is, oh, no, don't worry about it. It's totally fine. And this carpet's old anyways, even if it's brand new. I don't need this carpet. It's just whatever, right? Somebody's child, if you have children, if you're blessed with children, or if you've been around young children, they're always making a mess. They're going to spill something or another. If somebody's child comes over to your house and they're spilling something, just let it go. It's not supposed to be a big deal, right? And we're not supposed to be nitpicky about this stuff. And alhamdulillah, again, most of us, if we've grown up in Muslim families, we've probably seen this with our parents or with other people. But to be very, very, very generous in terms of our belongings as well, right? We might have some super nice piece of furniture. We might have a fancy car or something like that. And someone's like, oh, somebody eats in the car, and they're not supposed to eat in the car, and then they start yelling at them, why'd you eat in my car? Don't you know it's a brand new car and the leather seats and da-da-da-da-da. And it's just dunya, right? This shows an attachment to something that we're not supposed to have an attachment to. And again, it doesn't mean we let our things get ruined. Prophet ﷺ also tells us, take care of your things. It's good to take care of our belongings. But we're talking here about when other people use what we are, other people are in our homes, or they're using what we have, we're supposed to be generous with them, right? I remember I was at one of my friends' houses a couple of weeks ago, and I was feeding my son. Alhamdulillah, he's about 2 years old, and so as I fed him, crumbs would fall in one place, and then I kept chasing him and feeding more, and it was like the crumbly, and it kept falling, and I was like, and I kept trying to clean it up after him, right? Because I felt really bad. They also said the home is definitely on the newer side, and I was like, oh, this is all. And literally, they were just like, oh no, don't even worry about it. This happens all the time. They also have a young one, and they was like, don't even worry, it's all good. Like, literally made me feel completely at ease, even though I knew that this is going to be annoying now for them, that they're going to clean it up. But I just kept feeding him, and then eventually I tried to clean up whatever it is that I could, and then they helped clean up the rest as well. But there was kind of a hey, you're in our home, it's all good. We know that you have to exist with your baby and so on and so forth. Instead of kind of they could have not said anything, and I could have just kept picking up every little crumb after him. But instead, they make you feel at ease. This is an example of generosity, exemplifying being exemplified. So we're supposed to be generous in our mannerisms. The Muslim is a dignified human being, not nitpicky over every little thing that somebody does. And we should also then so category 1 is with our wealth. Category 2 is with guests and in our home and home environment with our belongings. And category 3 is with how you make other people feel, just with regards to your personality and being around you. So there is a way to be a magnanimous person, just like there's a way to be generous and magnanimous with your wealth. How is one a generous or magnanimous person in a personality? That they always make people feel like they have room for them. Always. So even if they're busy, they don't make it seem like I have no time at all for you. I'm just not going to give you any time. They try to go out of their way, even if it takes a couple of weeks to get the time, to make time for other people. They try to go out of their way to be generous with their time. The Prophet ﷺ was the busiest of people to ever walk the face of this earth. And yet he would always do his best to make time for people, right? He literally had a open door policy, meaning he had like a curtain rod which would distinguish between his house and that was it. There was not like a hard big door type of setup, right? It was like, hey, come on in. And he would be always finding ways to fill the needs of other people. If somebody needed something, even if he didn't have it, and this was the khutbah, mashallah, that Imam Bilal gave on Friday, he mentioned that even if the Prophet didn't have any wealth, and none of the Sahaba had anything to give, he would say, okay, go and buy what you want and take it on credit and put it in my name and I'll pay that back. That's how generous he was. But it's the concept of making time for other people. So at minimum, we need to be generous with the people, not even generous, we need to meet the basic obligations of the people in our lives who have rights over us, like our parents and other people. If we are too, quote unquote, busy to make time to see our parents or to call them, or to check in on them, which is something that often happens in Western society. People just they move out of the house and just kind of forget that, like, oh yeah, they raised me for almost 20 plus years and still are raising me in many ways. So to make time for other people is very, very important, and especially to make time for people who need assistance and who need our help. So these are 3 components, and the buckets I would recommend is the way that it was structured. So the root of these, now he gets into the root of these. And so we talked about what the disease is. So now let's understand, where does this disease come from? And then we'll talk about what the treatment is, inshallah. So the first biggest root, as you could probably guess, is love of the dunya, right? Somebody's attached to the dunya, and it's like, we just don't want to let it go because we think we're going to be here permanently, right? And if we love this dunya, what happens is, we are constantly going to be pursuing the dunya. And then anything which decreases our dunya in our mind, we're not going to want to engage in. So if we have, again, $10,000 and we can give away $1,000 and it can benefit our akhirah, but hold on, it decreases our dunya, it decreases our ability to have savings, and then we have less, and then we're not going to give it away, right? Maybe we'll give away $5 or $10, we won't give away more. Because the love of the dunya is so strong. And the interesting thing is that the most wealthy of people are sometimes the most stingy and miserly, right? Because the love of the dunya has gotten so strong. Not always, there's very, very, very generous people too, mashallah. But sometimes the people who have accumulated wealth for a significant period of time, they are super, super, super careful to ever spend that wealth on anybody else. And that's a problem. That's a problem, because we want to be very, very mindful of the blessings that Allah has given us. So we do not want to be in a state where, if we are given money, that as we get more and more and more, if that's a blessing that Allah gives us and we're using it in the right way, that we end up saying, you know what, now I'm gonna stop giving because I need to save more, so I can do this and I can do this and I can buy a bigger house and I can buy more cars and da. So the miserly one is the one who they have this extreme attachment to the love of they have an extreme attachment to this dunya, and there's a deep, deep, deep love of this world. The second component of this is that somebody just doesn't understand that sometimes it's good to let go of things, right? It's good to let go. And the analogy that's actually given is, and again, sorry for getting graphic, but this is done in the text. Like literally, if somebody has like fecal matter that they've accumulated after digesting their food, and they're just like, yeah, I'm never going to let it go. It's not. And they're going to get sick. They're going to get constipated until they get their gut is going to be completely ruined. I mean, it wouldn't even be really physically possible to do that. But if they tried and never, right, never let out what was harming them, then it would harm them. And it could harm them to a very, very serious point. So this is the way that miserliness is compared. That if somebody has something that's actually harming them, money and accumulating money, and all of it, right? It's like when you have food, it's not that all of it is going to come out. No, it's going to be portion of it is going to come and it's going to be nutrients and it's going to actually translate into the breakdown into carbohydrates and then eventually go into being energy for us to expend. But some of it is going to be digested and then it's going to that be excreted. If the human beings, same thing with our money. Some of it we come and we collect, right? We get our money, we get our income, we have to spend on bills and so on, buy people things, whatever it is. And then some of it we have to let go. We spend on other people, donate, whatever else it is. But if everything we're just like, no, I got to keep all of it for myself. I can't let go. I can't let go. I can't let go. Then it's going to harm us. And so this analogy I found, while it's, a little bit grotesque, and I found to be helpful because sometimes physically, if somebody feels something, and then you can compare that physical feeling to something that happens spiritually, it is very, very helpful. So again, the root of this is love of the dunya. And we'll get into love of the dunya in a lot more detail, inshallah, but just wanted to mention a few things about this that Imam Ghazali expands on. So he says that at the end of the day, the heart will it's a container, and it's either going to be filled with the dunya or it's going to be filled with Allah. And then you could extrapolate that to mean love of the akhirah and love of the next life. So if we don't fill it with the love of Allah, then there's no way to really get rid of the love of dunya. The majority of the human beings are created in a state of greed. As the Prophet ﷺ said in a famous narration, that if the son of Adam could have one mountain of gold, that could be like $1 billion. Let's say a mountain of gold is worth $1 billion. They just want another one, another valley of gold, rather. So they just want one valley, they get another, they just want another one. And they get the second one, they just want the third one. And it is just never enough. So the way to displace that isn't to just force it to come out. No, it's because the container needs to be filled with something. It's to actually say, hold on a second, I have to direct this. I have this capacity to be desirous, or to want. And instead of wanting dunya, I actually want the akhirah. Instead of wanting the lower world, I want the higher world. And finally, instead of wanting wealth and material objects, I want the creator of all of those things. Who would want the creation when they can have the creator? So it's to direct, and this is a really, really amazing metaphor, it's to direct all of the things that are attachment to creation and to say, I'm just going to shift it to be attached to the creator. And if we can become attached to the creator, then all that time we spend trying to do things and trying to get more and exerting ourselves, we'll spend a portion of that time just talking to the creator and asking from the creator and remembering the creator and thinking about the creator and reflecting on the wonders of the creator. And that is the ultimate goal of the human being, to know that Allah has created us, and he has created us with this amazing capacity to know him and to love him and to emulate his prophets and to emulate certain qualities that he has, even though of course we can't achieve that perfection in these qualities like he has perfection and generosity, but he wants us to emulate these things and to fill our heart with him and love of him and want of him and not of the dunya. And this then gets into why miserliness is so dangerous, because it's just going to keep somebody in the dunya. They're just, if you can't be generous, you can't give for other people, how are you going to give for Allah? If somebody can't even do the basics at the basic level, give for zakat, for something Allah commanded them, give their time to serve their family in some way, or to serve their Lord in some way. how are we ever going to attain what we're supposed to attain? Allah Ta'ala, He says that we're not going to attain until we love, we won't attain righteousness until we love from what we have, until we give rather from what we love, from the wealth that we love. So there has to be an element of whatever we are most attached to, we say, no, I'm going to part with it in order to sacrifice and get closer to our Lord. So in one narration, it's mentioned that the worst person is the miser, is the stingy one. In the world, they're deprived of their dunya, and the akhirah, they're punished. Like the miser doesn't even benefit. Like they could have, again, $1 billion, $1 million, $10 million. They're not even benefiting from their wealth in this life because they just want to keep it all. And then in the akhirah, they're punished because they didn't spend. So it's like the worst of both. It's like you didn't even get the quote unquote enjoyment in this life, and then you definitely are now going to be in trouble in the next life. So we have to root this out. And all of us, we have to figure out what amount of this do we have. Again, every disease that we go through, this is the first big one. We might not all have every disease at the same amount, but some of us, we have certain diseases more, and others we might have already worked on ourselves, or Allah just has blessed us and to not have the disease. Like there's some people, they're innately generous. Like I have a cousin who gets $20 for Eid, and he's young. And when he was young, you get the Eid, and he just would be go buy $15 of gifts for the parent who gave it to him. And it's just subhanallah, what kind of what kind of generosity is that, right? Versus others, they'd get the $20 and they just of course you're just gonna keep it for yourself, right? And some would be well, how come I didn't get more? They gave me 50, you only gave me 20. Right? So there's different qualities that different people have. The key for us is to know where are we at with regards to these qualities. And again, what's the goal? Equilibrium, not excess. So we don't want to go in excess spending either. There's a spectrum. Imam Ghazali. So now we're going to talk about the cure and how do we get to the middle path. So on one side of the spectrum is the negative disease of stinginess and miserliness, which is the root of it is love of the dunya. We'll have a whole section on love of the dunya, so we're not going to get to it in detail right now. The middle path is generosity. That's the middle path in this instance. And then there's kind of an excessiveness where somebody just doesn't even think about it and is just letting go of money, right? Then you have to, of course, save some and so on. And so we're not at the level of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, whose iman was so high that he was said, how much did you, he brought all of his wealth. And he said, how much did you save for your family? And he said, what did you leave for your family rather? He says, I left Allah and His Messenger. For him, that's a maqam he's attained, because he actually had so much taqwa that he did leave Allah and His Messenger, and that was way more than any of the wealth. But for the vast majority of people, nothing wrong with saving money and having money set aside in a business or investments and so on and so forth. Key is generosity in the middle trait. So if we are very, very stingy, the first thing that we do is we root out the love of this world by spending on these categories that we talked about. So if we're not giving our zakat, big problem, huge deal. We've got to give our zakat. If we owe zakat from the past, zakat is not just wiped out or forgiven. Zakat, if there was times where you and I weren't given zakat, have to calculate it. I have to calculate how much we had. And if we had over the nisab, if we started earning money, so this comes from the time of puberty, when someone becomes baligh, and they have been over the nisab amount, which is call it, ranging between $3,000 to $6,000, depending on the time and the opinion. And so they had over that amount of money. Now they owe zakat. They owe 2.5% of that standing wealth. If we don't know what that was, go back to your bank account from however far back you can go and start looking at the balances from 2015 until 2016 and the difference between the two. Not the difference, rather the balance that you had. And if you had over the nisab and you didn't pay the zakat, you have to pay the two. You pay, it's like a qada zakat, whatever we owe, right, is the concept. Fasting has to be made up for if we have qada fast. We know this. Most people should know as well that the Hanafis, Malikis, and Shafis also require we make up our prayers. There's a minor opinion that one does not make up their prayers in one of the schools, but it's not the recommended opinion. The dominant opinion is one also has to make up their prayers that they missed from the past. So anyhow, but this specifically is about zakat, or about miserliness. So we calculate our zakat. So this is the first level. If we can't even give what's owed to Allah, we're not going to be able to get to the next level, right? We're not really generous then, even if we spend on other people, because the first obligation is for what Allah wants. And as we're not giving it to Allah, we're giving it to the poor. But Allah is the one who then is giving us the reward for that. So that's the first thing that we do to remove the love of the dunya from our heart, is to spend on what's required of us. The second thing now is to spend on what is required of us with regards to our obligations. So making sure that we're totally good with taking care of people who are in our care and who need our help and our assistance with things. The next one then is to now go and spend extra. So to root out the love of the world, if we already are doing these things, now we say, okay, you know what? The masjid's having a fundraiser. I'm going to give some more money, right? I'm going to give another $500. I'm going to give another $1,000. I'm going to give another $10, whatever I can afford. I'm going to do it. That we are seeing, of course, we're continuing to see our brothers and sisters suffer throughout the world, in Gaza and in Palestine and Sudan and many other parts of the Muslim world. Afghanistan just had another tragedy with these floods in the last week or so. So when what we can, we give. And we say, I'm going to detach and give more, and then try to give more. So this now will do more spiritually. Again, this medicine, it will do more. It will be more powerful than just doing the basics. Just doing the basics will not bring somebody to equilibrium. It'll just keep somebody out of the fire. That's all it does. You and I want to be people who are in alignment with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a virtuous sunnah, right? Not something that we're just doing the bare minimum. So then we give more. So give more sadaqah. This will remove love of the dunya, spending on other people. So the categories here we talked about, spending on the poor, spending on other people around us, right? Family members and so on and so forth. And then just every now and then I'd recommend that we go out of our way to just like buy something nice for people and go just treat them for something. And again, it could be a dinner, it could be a lunch, it could be coffee, whatever we can afford. And even if we just stretch it a little bit, say, you know what, I'm going to pay for this. I might not love my credit card statement at the end of the month, but I'm going to go out of my way to do this so I can get rid of this attachment, because this dunya is not what matters. It's the amount that I'm spending now that will be saved. Actually, that's the savings. The savings are what we spend. The savings are not what we save. This, because we could literally die with $50,000 in our bank account, and guess what? Not our money. Either it's going to inheritance, or it gets caught up in probate courts and all these different things, and then doesn't actually transfer to our heirs if we didn't actually take care of it, properly with will and wasiya and estate planning. So the money is what we're gonna spend. What we save is really what we give. That's what's going to be with Allah. That Allah is storing that all in our spiritual bank account. So keep that in mind. Anytime we're feeling like, I don't want to do this, okay, no, but this is really what I'm saving. And if somebody has like an investment goal, like there's a lot of different strategies to earn income and to increase our income and so on and so forth. Somebody should also equally have an akhirah investment goal. So they're spending $1,000 a month or let's say $100 a month on some investment that they have. They're opening up an IRA or they're contributing to their 401k. They should also be doing, I would recommend, at least half of that or some amount of that in some charitable cause every month, right? Sponsoring orphans is one that I think is very, very important in the time that we live in right now. There's so many orphans around in the Muslim world, in Palestine, most recently in Syria and Yemen and Afghanistan. I mean, they need assistance, and this is a huge burden, or rather responsibility, that people have to take on. If Allah has given us some money, so $100 a month, $200 a month can go a long way to assisting a few families or assisting a few people in parts of the Muslim world. So, and we're doing it for our own dunya and for our retirement, and we don't even know if we're going to make it. We're not going to make it till then, right? But at least this money that we spend, it's going to be there for us when we die, because we will have stored it in our spiritual bank account. So the key, this is how love of this world is removed. We aren't attached to it, number one. We give as much as we can, we're generous, and we force ourselves to spend on others. And the third one is we reflect on death and what's going to happen when we die. So we just mentioned kind of this idea that we don't take what we have with us into the grave. But if you really reflect on the grave, it's a very small place. Everybody goes in the same way. Everybody is going to be wearing a white kafan, and it doesn't matter if that person had a net worth of $500 million or a net worth of $5, didn't have any money to their name. Everybody's wearing the same white kafan. Everybody's going and being held by the the people who are going to the janazah. Hopefully everybody's getting a funeral prayer and prayed on them. And then we're all getting buried, and everybody's asked the same questions. So and none of the questions by the angels, by the way, are how much money did you have, or how many homes did you have, or how many cars did you have, or how many luxury bags did you have, or whatever. None of those are the questions. The angel, we know who is your Lord, what is your deen, and who is your prophet, or who is this man. And the Prophet ﷺ, they will be shown the Prophet ﷺ. Those are the questions. So that's going to be based on the way that we lived our life, not based on how much we had. So he says, reflecting on death, and this is actually going to be, as you read the text, you'll see it's one of the cures for a bunch of diseases. Why? Because it's such a potent medicine. Sit and reflect on death for like 10 minutes, and your whole state changes. Everything. What's important changes completely. All of the hustle and the bustle and the pursuit of the vain glories of this world just all calms down. It just all goes away. And the reflection of death is powerful, and it says, hold on, I have a purpose to my life. It doesn't mean we stop working and all these things, no. But it does mean that we put everything into perspective. And this is one of the fastest ways to get somebody to stop doing haram. Haram for sure, but also the makruhat, as well as some of the excess and permissible things. Somebody who reflects on death, even if they're like watching Netflix for an hour or 2 hours a day, which is not a good use of our time, they'll be like, hold on a sec, I'm going to die at some point. Like, do I really want to meet Allah spending 1/10 of my waking hours watching some programming that's like controlled by Zionist Hollywood? No, I don't. And supporting problematic political agendas? Probably not, right? I got to tame that. Same thing with how much time we waste in other ways. So reflection of death has a bunch of cures. One of them is it impacts our attachment to the dunya, reflecting on death. So I'd recommend what we do if we don't already regularly go to the graveyard to janazah prayers and to attend a janazah. We should try to make it a practice like once a month, or we say, you know what, I'm going to pick a day. And there's janazah prayers at the graveyards, like there's one here in Livermore, there's other graveyards in Hayward, Sacramento, other places. There's janazah prayers, of course, going on regularly, and burials going on. I'm going to pick one day, and I'm going to find a janazah, and I'm going to attend it. It doesn't have to be somebody we know. It's a Muslim. We're going to get the reward, inshallah. But if it's somebody, you get one of those emails from the masjid in the community, so-and-so has passed away, janazah will be this time. I'm going to block off 2.5 hours or whatever time it is. I'm going to go to the prayer, and I'm going to go to the burial site. And then I'm not going to talk and hang out with people and it be a socializing thing. I'm going to actually watch the whole burial, and I'm going to reflect on what's going to happen when I'm in there. And then I'm going to relate that to whatever spiritual disease of heart I'm struggling with, and let us really seriously sit with that, right? If we can go sometime on our own to the graveyard and just see an open grave, like when, before they put a body in there, they dig up like 5, 10, 15 at a time, and we just look at it. And we just look. Now, imagine ourselves in there, and that has a powerful effect, right? Very, very powerful effect. The scholars, many of the early generations, they would dig their own grave in the equivalent of a backyard in their land, and they would just sit in it every day for like a long time, reflecting. Some of them would do khatam of Quran monthly or weekly, frequently in the grave that they dug, so that they could and then they would ask to be buried in that same grave, right? And so it could be a what place. But the idea here is, and the Prophet ﷺ would visit Baqi multiple times a week, if not every night. Regularly, he would be visiting the graveyards. And the key here is to reflect and to of course, to make dua for the deceased and so on and so forth, but to reflect on death. If we visit the mall more than we visit the qabr, if we visit the marketplace more than we visit the qabr, if we visit all sorts of the movie theaters and the ice cream shops and the restaurants, and we go to these places maybe multiple times a week, and we never go to the grave, and then we wonder, why is my heart dead? Why do I not feel something? Well, that's why. Because these places, they're places of dunya. They're going to make us get more attached to the dunya. Right? We see all the luxurious components of this world and all these different things, and the graveyard, that's where the people who they go. It's this quiet, somber place. There's not that many people there, but the people there, they're the ones in the qabr. There are many people there in one sense, right? But they're not there walking around anymore. So it will have a profound impact on us. So these are the 3 ways. These are the 3 ways that we can impact removing this disease of miserliness, that we get to the cure of love of this world. We spend more on other people than we are trying to spend regularly on ourselves, and we reflect on death and the closeness of death, and this will be a means of removing this disease. So with that, there's one other disease that's really closely linked to this called wantonness, but I think for the sake of time, we might not cover it today. If we'll first do questions, and then if we have a few minutes, we'll cover it, inshallah. So any questions either here or online? If you have questions online, just post them in the chat, in the comments, and if you have questions here, raise your hand. Sister said, if you have a question, I can't fully see you, so just let me know. Okay.
One question, I guess, hypothetically, if you're finding yourself to be more miserly with certain people and not with others, so as an instance, like if you're generous with your family or you think you are, and then not with your friends, or vice versa, is that maybe indicative or something, or is there like a workaround how to deal with that?
Great question. Question is if we're finding maybe with specific people we're more generous, and others we're a bit more miserly. How do we kind of think about that? So there could be two components to this. One, the natural instinct is to be more generous with your family. I mean, that's like human instinct, and we should have that. If we don't have that, something might be off in a different way, right? We should want to spend on our children. That's fine. Just let him. We should want to spend on our children. We should want to spend on our our family members, our parents, so on and so forth. So if something is wrong there, where we want to spend more on like our friends than our family, that's an issue just in terms of like prioritization of and really understanding how important family is, because it's really an obligation to take care of our family, right? Like it's an obligation to feed them, it's an obligation to clothe them, and so on and so forth. And for our parents, while it's technically not an obligation when we're younger, unless they need it, it becomes an obligation as they grow older, again, especially for men. So then it's, if though we prefer one group over another, then what it could be is a negative feeling towards a specific group, right? So like, for example, if you don't like somebody, you're not going to want to spend on them. That might be the case. So that is a different disease of heart, which could be linked to, which at its highest levels, it's anger or rancor towards somebody. And it could really be a deep level called hatred, where somebody like just hates somebody, so they never want to spend on them. One way to actually get rid of the hatred for that person is to spend on them. One of the ways we're told is when you have something against somebody, you give them a gift. You buy them something nice, and you go and you give it to them. So this is a way in which the disease will leave the heart. But again, very unlikely you're going to prefer your family and your friends in the same way. Most of the time, the family will always take precedence, as they should. They should take precedence in all forms of spending, and then come, our friends and brothers and sisters. Does that help? Okay. Do we have time for a few more questions before I'm up?
My daddy. Daddy.
So there's a question about, let's see,
Daddy.
in terms of the different ways that we can give charity. So what are the different forms of sadaqah? There's various forms of sadaqah that somebody can give. Kind of practically, you can give to your local masjid. You can give in charity to your local masjid. There's donation boxes. Masajid have Venmos, they have PayPals, whatever way somebody can give. There's ample forms of giving online via online charities. So, Muslim charities, Islamic Relief, Muslim Aid USA, so on and so forth. Those are good examples where somebody can pick a cause and say, I'm going to give to Palestine humanitarian aid. I'm going to give to Afghanistan aid. I'm going to give to Pakistan aid, and so on and so forth. So those are various ways that somebody can give. And so most charitable causes would qualify as sadaqah. Somebody can also, instead of giving their wealth, can give like their belongings, right? So like they can donate, or not belongings, but can give like physical goods. So if somebody is in need of chairs, they can give chairs. Food, of course, right? So feeding the homeless, feeding people who are needy, and buying food or cooking food and going out and distributing that food, that's a form of sadaqah. So hopefully those are kind of a couple of categories that help.
Daddy.
And giving sadaqah, giving food, giving charity, with whether it's money or even giving your time, right? Assisting with your time, it's also a form of spending on other people. So if people volunteer, like you volunteer at a soup kitchen, or you volunteer at an orphanage, you volunteer to help the homeless, you give clothing away, you volunteer to make bags for people, those type of things like that. Okay. Any other questions?
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Everybody wants, true Muslim wants to be generous, right? And this is the aim that everybody's here and we try to be generous. And sometimes I'm thinking this might that if you want to be generous for your family or for your friends or your relatives, nowadays everybody needs something, right? If you think you have like 2,000, right? If you want to be a generous, if you pay like 100 for one, and everybody say that I need.
Daddy.
As well as in
Daddy.
you have a family, right? If you buy something for them
Daddy.
now,
Daddy.
this century, and everything is you have to buy new one. There's no anything that they are not saying that that's enough, right?
Right.
And this is the case that if we think that if we will be generous, then that's the
Daddy?
case. If we will not be
Daddy?
generous, then we will not.
Dada.
And we will be in the middle of if we be generous, what's happening if not?
Right.
You know? Hope you
Yeah. I think you're trying to understand, like, what's the balance between just giving everything away.
If we pay everything, then we have something to say for our family to think about the
The needs that we have. Yeah.
needs we have. And
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So the key here comes. Oh, go ahead.
I want to add something. For example, if I go to search on the internet, and there are lots of fundraising for every place, for Palestine, for every places. When you go there, then there are lots of maybe thousands of sites come up, and you have to pay for everyone, for example, right? And we don't know, and if we spend too much, that's not enough. For example, this only example, not enough. Just ask my question that if we spend too much and there's nothing left, and we think that we are not generous, what to do? So I am in the middle, and we should spend everything that we have an income, or what we do in this case. What should we do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is that essentially, what's the balance between, there's so many different causes to give to. There's so much money that we could literally have endless amounts and just have to keep giving and giving until we essentially run out, compared to how do we attain this balance between what we need to spend on ourselves, our families, and so on and so forth, and then how much can we actually manage in terms of giving, right? So this is where the equilibrium we were talking about becomes really important, because the middle path, the middle way that we're trying to attain is to know when it's possible for us to give, and maybe to go a little bit more than that, right? And also to know that we have responsibilities and we're not required to give all of our wealth away. So as long as you are fulfilling the obligations of zakat, and you are doing some level of sadaqah, and you're fulfilling your family obligations in terms of taking care of your family and so on and so forth, you are not required at all. And nor does it mean that the only way to attain generosity is to give every single thing away. Now, the Prophet ﷺ would not sleep at night until he had given everything essentially in his home away. But his level of tawakkul is very different than our level of tawakkul. So we have to know where we're at in terms of our relationship with Allah, know where we're at in terms of these qualities of trusting in Allah, and then we give what is a manageable amount for us to give. So if somebody makes $5,000 a month, and after they've taken care of all their obligations, they're left with $500 a month, if they can even give like $20 of that, $50 of that, maybe $100 of that away in charity, but they're saving some money, that's totally okay. You could still be amongst the generous if you're giving that with a happy heart, and you're giving that in a state where you feel a sense of, I'm doing this for the sake of other people. Because what matters with Allah is not the amount, it's the sincerity by which somebody gives, the taqwa that somebody has when they give. So the key for us to unlock generosity is not to give everything away. we're not at that maqam. I would not recommend that's something somebody does. Somebody attains a middle balance, a middle path of how much they can manage. They set aside based on their monthly income and their savings. I'm going to try to give this much, and this is what I'm going to stick to. And you don't overdo it and try to go more and more, unless the period of Ramadan where you can do that. But you don't. That would then be considered on the other side of the spectrum. With miserliness and stinginess is on one side, and on the other side is what you're essentially talking about, where you can, even if somebody had $1 billion, they can keep giving until they're at zero. That's not something somebody is required to do, nor would it mean the only way to manifest generosity. Yeah. Okay, so with that, Maghrib is in, so we'll go ahead and end. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد نورك الساري من ذلك الجاري واجمعين في كل اطواره وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم يا نور ربنا اتنا في الدنيا حسنه وفي الاخره حسنه وقنا عذاب النار ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. Ya Allah, we ask that you pardon us, that you forgive us, Ya Allah, and that you assist our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, that you pour your mercy upon them, Ya Allah, and that you give them faraj, and that you give them relief, and that you stop this crime and this genocide against them, Ya Allah, and that you help the Muslim world who are struggling, Ya Allah, and that you action and look over our brothers and sisters and over the children, over those who are weak, Ya Allah, and over those who are in immense need of you, Ya Allah, that you give to them and that you help and feed those who are hungry and those who are in famine and those who are in dire straits, and that you give water to those who are thirsty and that you provide shelter to those who need shelter. Ya Rabbil Alameen, we ask you, Ya Allah, that you give us the ability to implement this knowledge and that you give us the ability to purify our hearts and that you purify our hearts for us. We ask you for everything that the Prophet asked for, and we ask you protection from everything evil that he has protection from. Sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Somebody could just make adhan.